Hi everyone, I'm Sherry, also known as Sweet Melba. Thanks for joining me for Sunday on the Porch. We make a lot of choices in our life, right? Some big, some small, some easy, some hard. And, some of them turn out to be pretty significant in how they influence our life and the path we end up going down. So I've been thinking about that a lot more lately as I'm getting ready to retire. I have 44 days left and I'm retiring on June 30th. So I think it's kind of natural. You kind of think about, where you're at and how you got there, some of those choices you made along the way. And I think in midlife, we do that pretty regularly, whether you're looking to retire or not. But again, some choices are, no big deal, but some turn out to be pretty important ones. And I think it's important for us to reflect on those. And so, again, I've kind of been doing that. So, I wanted to share a little bit about some of my thoughts on some of the choices that I've had in my life and why they were so important. And of course, I'm sure you've probably thought about things like that as well. So I hope you'll join me and chat a little bit about some of those choices in life and how influential they can actually be. So for me, I think there's probably, up to this point in my life, probably five choices that really stand out for making a big difference in my life and my path. And the first one, and I kind of think this is probably one of our earliest decisions as young adults, is our education. And are we going to go to college? And if it's not college, did you want to go to trade school? Or, for that matter, did you just want to go ahead and start working? We finish high school, presumably, everybody finishes high school. And, what do you do next? And for the most part, that's our decision, right? Certainly there's a lot of things that go into that, and financial capacity to make some of those choices, your family needs at that time and whatnot. But for those of us that were, in a position to decide, well, were we going to go to college or, as I say, go to a trade school maybe? What went into that? What brought us to make the decisions that we made? For me, education. I was the first in my immediate family to go to college. And so, that was, I don't know that I really thought a lot about that, but certainly, you know, in the scheme of our family, that was something that my parents thought about. But I kind of always knew I was going to go to college. For the longest time, I had wanted to be a lawyer. And so I knew I had to go to college to do that. So I was going to go to college. And I went to college locally. So I commuted, it was like a 20-minute drive. So, anyway, so I had always, kind of in high school had jobs that were business, finance type jobs and whatnot. So I figured, business was a good major. But what I loved doing was my favorite subject, I guess I'd say, was history. And that was thanks to Mrs. Doom, my eighth grade history teacher, who just really lit that spark. So I decided I was going to have a minor in history. And so that's kind of how I got decided I was going to college. And so I had the opportunity to go to work for a lawyer in the area. And after working there for about a year, I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I was like, well, what else do I want to do? And again, I went back to the history, right? So I thought, well, I'll be a teacher. I'll teach high school history because I had a great teacher. So maybe that's what I'll do. So I had 2 years left in my degree. So the timing was really good. So I switched. I went to a history major and a business minor, and it worked out fine. And thankfully, my professors, my advisor, said, okay, if this is what you're going to want to do, you're going to have to focus a little bit more in the way that you're doing history and studying it. So the expectation level went up a little bit for my teachers. So that was good. And they were suggesting and kind of asking the right questions about my interest in being a teacher for history. So that helped, kind of guide some of my decisions in the classes I took, right? So thankfully they were doing that for me. So that was great. So after graduating from my undergrad with my degree in history, I was like, well, I've got to get a teaching credential. And so I decided that I was going to go to grad school. And I did that for a year. I went out of state, and that didn't work out too well. I did great in my classes, but just the environment in which I was in was not where I really wanted to be. So I decided to come back home. And so I was just not going to do the teaching anymore. That kind of went into the mix. And so I just went back to what I had been doing all along, which was the business and finance related positions. And that was all great. So that's kind of where my education kind of ended up, so to speak, formal education. So I'd be curious to hear from you kind of where your education direction was, and why did you choose the major you did? Or why, if you went into trade, what trade you went into, and how that education in the trade went for you, and did you change direction? I know certainly that's not unusual, both in education and in trade work as well. So again, if you'd like to share, I'd love to hear in the comments. But that was the first real big choice, right? For me, was making those education decisions and what I was studying and what I thought I wanted to do. So next, it was on to the next big one, which was career. So I think a lot of us think about, obviously what, in school, what is it you're going to do with this? What are you taking this major? What is it that you want to do? What's that career going to be? And certainly, I think for many people, you don't just have one career, you may have two, maybe three. So, things change and your interests change, and you get the experience, and sometimes it changes your direction in what you're doing. So, again, I kind of thought, well, I'd be doing business related stuff. So, I made another move to where my parents had moved to, and had the opportunity to do, again, business finance work, but in the nonprofit field. And I'd never worked for a nonprofit. But that's how my career started. I ended up having a career in the nonprofit field for, coming up now as I'm retiring this year, for 29 years. And my focus within there changed, as, again, I said, my interests kind of changed, and how I kind of decided to make, decisions and whatnot in that perspective. But so I had been doing the finance work, and I had another person, similar to my teachers, but a mentor. His name was Bill, and he recognized what he thought were skills and abilities that I had that would be good for fundraising. And so one day we'd gone to lunch. We were working on a fundraising event, and we were talking it through. And he said, you would be really good if you pursued just a fundraising career. Why don't you think about that? And I thought, what? It's like I was just kind of doing what was part of my job. I really hadn't thought about it in a specialized area within nonprofits. It just really wasn't something I was aware of or thinking of. But, thanks to him, I started to, look at some education specifically in that area and professional association. So again, some choices that I made to kind of listen to what he was suggesting. And so I started to do that and found out that I really did love that kind of work, and that I was good at it too. So again, you might have people that come across your path that influenced you or suggested something to you. So if you'd like to share, if you had a similar example, I would love to hear in the comments. But I was fortunate that somebody saw that and said something. And I was fortunate for the other mentors that I had within that area. But, I stayed with the nonprofit, but, I decided another choice that I wanted to have my own business and that I saw a need in the community that I thought I could help with from the fundraising perspective. And so I started my consulting contract business and started that in 2005, and really enjoyed that. Worked with all different types of levels of organizations and whatnot, and that was great. I really benefited from that, and contributed to the community. So again, that was a hard decision at first, right? To step out from the security of being an employee and starting your own company, your own business, right? But it worked out good, and I had good examples in that my mom and dad had been self-employed and ran their own businesses as well. So I had some good examples, and of course that education in business, accounting, finance, that helped too. It was a path that kind of moved around a little bit, but kind of stayed within the same neighborhood, shall we say. So, but the history was never far from the work that I did or my interests. My free time I spent working on history related things and whatnot. And so I really saw, is there a way for me to, continue to do this type of work and work too within the history aspect? So I looked for organizations that I could work with that were had a history orientation to them, a history organization or some element of history in their work. So I was able to do that. But I had to make some decisions, and some choices about how I was going to try and find those different clients that I could work with, because I really wanted to bring the history back, that I really wanted to do that. And so I was fortunate to be able to do so. And I've been working primarily with history organizations for about 10 years now. So, but that took some maneuvering and again, some choices to get there. So, uh, that was another, again, obviously, career area that has been so influential in my life in so many different ways that choices that I made along the way allowed that to happen. And because of that, I was able to kind of move into a different area of my life, with another big choice. So depending on, again, what are some of those, early directions in your adult life, this area for me, relationship and romantic relationship, was not a priority for me. My education and my career was. And it just wasn't something that was high on my priority list. And not that I didn't have interactions and whatnot, but it just wasn't something I was aiming towards. But, eventually things kind of settled down with my career. I was kind of where I wanted to be. And it was kind of an area that I was willing to kind of look at again. And was it something I really wanted to focus on or not? Because, I think for a lot of us, we kind of have a vision or daydream, whatever you want to call it, about what we think our romantic life is going to look like. Did you want to get married? As a kid growing up, did you think, oh, I'm going to get married and I'm going to have kids, and what that family looked like? Or did you want to be single? Maybe that's not what you wanted to do. So again, if you'd like to share, I'd love to hear in the comments. But so I had a particular position on relationships, right? And I didn't want to get married. That wasn't something I thought I was going to do. And I had thought about it and whatnot, and it just didn't seem like something that I would do. I just had so many other priorities. But I made a choice, at a certain point, that changed that. In that, my education was done, my career was done, and I I guess I had space in my life to consider a relationship and being with somebody to go and do things with and spend life with, right? So my group of people was pretty small, but I made the choice to do something that was really unusual for me, was to go on a dating site. And I was on match.com, and I'd been on there for a few months, and my membership was getting ready to expire, and I'd gone to a couple lunches and a dinner or two, and it wasn't anything spectacular, but it was getting ready to expire, and I had about 2 weeks left. And I got an email from this guy, and said he wanted to saw my picture and was interested in getting to know me, and if I wanted to reply. So I chose to reply. So another good choice. But that's how I met my husband. And it was, again, really out of the ordinary for me, but I guess I was at the right place, right? And I made the decision, the choice to go on that site, and I never would have met him otherwise. That wouldn't have happened. So it was a good thing that I did that. And in June, we'll be celebrating 19 years. So, sometimes it was a little choice, right? It wasn't a big thing. Deciding to go on a dating site doesn't seem like a big choice, but ultimately it changed my life. And I'm glad that I did that. So, you just never know if even some of those small choices have a huge impact, right? The other big thing, and this is a big thing, is, we got married. And, naturally, the next thing most people ask about is if you're going to have children. And this was not a big thing for us. I did not want to have children. That I knew. And I had known that, since I was probably, a young adult, really. And apparently my husband did too, because he didn't want children. And my husband jokes that on our first date, I brought this up and said I didn't want to have children. I don't think it was my first, maybe the second date. But it was something that I just knew. And I figured I might as well bring it up. But I know this can be, a delicate subject in some respects for people. But I don't mind sharing because it's really, it was not something I wanted to do. I just did not see myself being a mother and raising children. It wasn't something I was interested in doing. And so it really wasn't a discussion for my husband and I, because we both agreed on that. We didn't want to have children. And again, we talked about it very early on in our relationship. But again, I just didn't see that that was me. That wasn't something that I just didn't have that mothering instinct, so to speak, right? Or nurturing in that way. Certainly nurturing in other aspects, but not in raising children. And that's a decision that is a really big decision, um, because it affects the rest of your life if you do decide to have children, in raising them and going forward in life as they get older and raise families and what all comes with that. So it's a big thing when you make that decision, either to have children or not. But, again, I think when I look back on those choices in my life, that's a big one. My life would be very different than it is now if I had chose to have children. So it's not a decision that I regret in any way. I've never had second thoughts about that. Um, and I don't think my husband has either. We've been very happy with those choices that we individually made before we even knew each other. And then, going forward. So, again, another really big aspect of life that um, I think back on and appreciate that I was comfortable in knowing what that choice was going to be for me. So that's helpful and I think insightful too. And again, I'm glad to share that, that was, my choice. And my other big decision is really right now. I'm almost getting ready to retire here in the end of June. So the decision to retire is a big one for everybody who decides they're going to retire. Some people decide, they're not going to. They want to continue working. But that's not something that I wanted to do. And my husband either. And again, this was, an insight both of us had before we knew each other that at some point in our life we wanted to retire. And so retirement isn't one decision, right? It's multiple decisions, yearly decisions that you make in terms of the decisions that are about finances, activities, your job, and how you're going to plan for that. So that's one of those, in looking back and thinking about that, those are choices you make for years, decades, until you're at the point at which you feel you're ready to retire. And in our case, we're retiring relatively early. My husband retired 3 years ago. And again, I'm retiring here this year. But we planned for that, right? We worked with advisors, and again, making decisions, as soon as we were married as to, how what we were going to invest and how we were going to plan for that. But more importantly, now, at this point in our lives, what do we want our lives to look like going forward? So, again, those are choices that we're making, the lifestyle that we want to have. And nothing fancy, nothing over the top or extreme. I think we're pretty average when it comes to that. We aren't looking to have all the toys, so to speak, and the newest model of things or the top of the line clothes or whatnot. That's not us. So we're making choices again about we want our life to look like and how we want to spend our time, what activities we want to do, and how we want to spend time with other people, family and friends. So when I think about it, retirement is a lot of choices, right? Starting years ago till you get to the point where you're ready to make that decision. And I'm glad that we've made the choices that we have over the years, and that we feel comfortable with the choice we make now. But we'll continue to make these choices, right? You know, Finances is an ongoing thing. You're always making choices about that. And so that's a lot about what retirement is too. It's, how you're spending your time, but it's also how you're being financially responsible to be able to do that. So another big aspect of our lives is planning for retirement and then making the decision of what our retirement is going to hopefully look like. And we'll continue to make those choices going forward. So, an important one, certainly for us. So, looking back, the topic of this video, looking back at the choices that have been important in shaping my life. And these are the ones that I think are really significant. But, there's lots of small ones too, that we don't necessarily think about regularly. So I hope that maybe, this chat today kind of allows us all to think a little bit more about some of those choices we've made, big ones, little ones, and being appreciative of those, because I think that's what reflecting on that means, or the benefit of doing that is remembering that there were individuals, friends, colleagues, maybe mentors, that teachers, that helped you make decisions along the way, that got you where you were along your path, and being acknowledging that. And I think that's important. I think it's also helpful in reminding us what our life lessons have been. What did we learn from a choice, whether that was a good choice, bad choice, challenging, whatever it may be? What did we learn from that? And it gives us the opportunity to be able to share that with other people who might can benefit as well. So reflecting allows us to see what we learned, because I think we learn from all of those experiences, and remembering that is important. And hopefully memories, good memories that we look back on and remember how important this particular individual may have been in what our life became in a lot of respects, or a certain opportunity or experience that we had that really shaped us. And we decided to pursue something, more along those lines. I think it, again, is a way for us to appreciate and better understand the role it had in our lives from that aspect. So hopefully fun memories, maybe some humorous ones too, that continue to remind us of our life and the enrichments that we've had. And overall, I think remembering the choices we've made along our path remind us that we didn't do it alone, right? We had these other people, we had these other experiences with other, friends and whatnot, that it's all of those together that brought us to the point that we're at. And remembering that, acknowledging those people and activities and whatnot is what allows us, I think, to be more content with where we are in our lives. That we don't just forget about that, and that we remember it took a community of people for us to get where we are. So I like looking back on that, and I hope that some of my stories and questions, so to speak, um, might be helpful for you in remembering some of those important choices in your life, and maybe some of the small ones too that made a difference. So I appreciate you joining me today for Sunday at the Porch, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. And again, I hope that maybe you spend some time thinking a little bit about some of those choices you've made in your life and how important they were in shaping where you're at today. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.